A janitor hummed one lullaby, and a grieving father realized she somehow knew a song only his late wife ever sang. How is that even possible? People always imagine that the loudest moments in life are the ones that change everything. A slammed door, a shouted argument, a final goodbye you can't take back. But sometimes it's the quiet scenes, the ones no one expects, that hit the hardest. And that's exactly what happened the afternoon everything shifted for Trevor Redding and his 8-year-old daughter, Hazel. Hazel wasn't the kind of kid you'd forget, not because she was loud, but because she used to light up any room she stepped into. Used to. Before things fell apart. Before the accident on that rainy stretch of I-75 outside Knoxville. Before she started gripping that tiny silver pendant like it was the last piece of her mother she had left. Trevor did what he could, or at least what he thought he could. He bought the newest gadgets, signed her up for weekend workshops, scheduled therapy, filled the house with tutors, babysitters, specialists, anyone who might understand what he didn't. But Hazel didn't want specialists. She didn't want new toys. She didn't want trips or treats or carefully planned activities. She wanted her mom. And Trevor, he didn't know how to give her that. So Hazel changed. Not overnight, but in small ways that crept into daily life. She went from raising her hand in class to sitting alone at recess. From telling long stories after school to staying silent in the car. From laughing at everything to crying at almost nothing. Her teachers at Lincoln Ridge Elementary in Columbus, Ohio, tried their best, but every day there seemed to be a new issue. A meltdown, a withdrawal, a phone call home. Trevor heard the same sentence again and again. She's hurting, Mr. Redding, and she's not letting anyone in. And honestly, he wasn't surprised. He was barely letting anyone in either. He tried to stay strong, tried to pretend he was fine, tried to bury himself in work so deeply that he couldn't feel anything. Running the real estate firm kept him busy, sure, but busy didn't mean better. If anything, it made things worse. Because while he signed contracts and negotiated deals, Hazel spent her days trying to survive a grief far bigger than her little shoulders could carry. Teachers watched her drift, counselors watched her break, but none of them ever guessed who would be the one to reach her. And definitely not in the way it happened. Because that turning point, it didn't happen in a classroom or a therapy session, or even on some carefully planned father-daughter day. It happened in the most ordinary place in the school, the cafeteria, at the most ordinary time, long after everyone had gone home. And the person who changed everything wasn't a specialist. She was the school janitor. Nora Briggs, a woman most people passed without a second thought, was about to walk into the quiet cafeteria with nothing but a mop bucket, a worn-out broom, and a patience that had carried her through more storms than she ever talked about. She had no idea Hazel was in there. Trevor had no idea anyone was reaching his daughter at all. And the rest of the world, they had no idea how close Hazel was to disappearing inside herself completely. But that afternoon, something unexpected was waiting in that cafeteria. Something small, something gentle, something powerful enough to crack open a grief that had been locked tight for 2 long years. But before anyone understood what was happening, a single moment, quiet enough to miss, began to pull Hazel back from the edge. If you asked anyone at Lincoln Ridge Elementary, they'd tell you the place looked normal enough. Wide hallways, bright murals done by the art club, and a cafeteria that always smelled faintly like chicken nuggets and industrial soap. But behind that everyday routine, people had started whispering about Hazel. Not cruel whispers, more like the kind adults share when they're out of answers. She used to smile all the time. She barely speaks now. She had another breakdown during math. Something's wrong, but she won't say what. Hazel wasn't trying to be difficult. She was trying to survive something she didn't have the words for, and kids notice everything, even when adults think they don't. A few of her classmates started avoiding her because they didn't understand why she cried at random moments. Others stared at the pendant she clutched, curious but too nervous to ask, and the ones who tried to help often ended up feeling helpless themselves. During recess, she'd sit by the fence alone, dragging a stick through the dirt, drawing circles over and over like she was trying to erase something only she could see. Teachers glanced over, worried, but they had 20 other kids to supervise. They hoped she would snap out of it someday. They hoped time would fix things, but time wasn't enough. Inside the school, the staff held meeting after meeting. They went through paperwork, suggested therapy sessions, rearranged schedules, and tried every soft-voiced approach they could think of. Still, Hazel kept slipping. Sometimes she'd shut down completely. Other times, she'd burst into tears if someone accidentally brushed her arm in line. She had become a storm trapped inside a small body, and no one could figure out how to calm it. Except one person. Someone no one expected to matter, Nora Briggs. Most people barely noticed Nora. She moved around the school the way a background song moves through a store, always there but rarely acknowledged. She swept, wiped, emptied trash, and listened quietly while others rushed past her. But Nora had a way of seeing things. Not in a dramatic or mysterious way, more like someone who had lived long enough to recognize pain even when it stayed silent. She noticed the little things, like how Hazel's eyes darted to the floor whenever someone spoke too loudly, or how her hands tightened around the pendant anytime a door opened, or how she always sat next to the same table at lunch, the one closest to the wall, the one that made her feel protected. What no one at school knew was that Nora understood grief more than most people there. She had her own story, her own years of learning how to breathe around an absence that didn't go away. But she never said a word to anyone about it. That afternoon, the one that would change everything, Nora wasn't looking for Hazel. She wasn't trying to solve anything. She was just doing her routine, sweeping crumbs, pushing her cart, thinking about what to cook for dinner later, nothing special. And somewhere across the building, Trevor was still pretending everything was fine, still making promises to himself he never had time to keep. The school had left him a message saying Hazel seemed more distressed than usual. He didn't know what he would find when he arrived. He only knew he was tired, tired of trying, tired of failing, tired of watching Hazel shrink into someone she wasn't. Hazel, on the other hand, had slipped into the cafeteria so quietly that the lunch staff didn't even notice. She curled into the corner, pendant in hand, trying to remember what her mother's voice sounded like. She didn't know Nora was walking toward her. She didn't know anyone would sit beside her. She didn't know a simple tune could bring back everything she thought she had lost. But that afternoon, the cafeteria wasn't as empty as she believed. And someone was finally about to notice her pain in a way no one else had managed to do. Most people at Lincoln Ridge walked right past Nora Briggs without a second look. She wasn't loud. She didn't interrupt. She didn't chase attention or try to be part of conversations happening around her. She simply moved quietly through her day, wearing the same faded green work shirt, pushing the same gray cleaning cart, humming barely audible tunes under her breath. But what people missed, what Hazel desperately needed, was that Nora noticed everything. She noticed which teachers were exhausted by noon. She noticed which kids pretended to be tougher than they felt. And she definitely noticed Hazel long before that afternoon in the cafeteria. It started months back, when Hazel would slip out of class during lunch and wander the hall, pretending she needed to use the bathroom. Nora didn't confront her, but she watched from a distance as Hazel hovered near the water fountain like she was waiting for someone who never came. One day, Nora approached her gently and said, "You all right, sweetheart?" Hazel didn't respond. She just clutched her necklace and looked at the floor. Nora didn't push. She simply said, "If you ever want company, I'll be around." That was their first conversation. No big moment, no breakthrough, just a simple offer Hazel never forgot. From then on, Hazel kept finding reasons to be near Nora's route. She'd sit on the floor outside the art room, or linger in the hallway near the cafeteria. She didn't speak much, but she stayed close enough to hear Nora humming old melodies, songs that had been passed down through Nora's family for decades. Nora didn't think much of it. She assumed the humming merely made the space feel less empty, but Hazel listened to every note like it was something precious, something she needed. And every time Nora hummed, Hazel's shoulders dropped, if only for a few seconds. That afternoon, Hazel slipped into the cafeteria long after lunch because she couldn't handle being around other kids. She curled into the corner with her pendant pressed to her chest. The cafeteria lights buzzed above her. Trays clattered faintly as they dried on the racks behind the counter. Hazel whispered, "I miss you, Mom." But no one heard. At least, she thought no one did. Not far away, Nora was mopping a hallway, taking her time like she always did. Her knees were tired. Her back ached. But she kept humming that same gentle tune she couldn't shake. Something her own mother used to sing during long evenings after work. A song that felt like home. She pushed open the cafeteria door without expecting anything unusual. then froze for just a heartbeat when she saw Hazel curled up alone in that corner. Nora didn't call her name, didn't gasp, didn't make it dramatic. She simply set her mop aside, pushed her cart to the wall, and slowly walked over. "Mind if I sit with you?" she asked. Hazel shrugged. She didn't have the strength to say yes or no. That shrug was enough for Nora. She lowered herself onto the cold tile floor, joints cracking softly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Hazel whispered, "Everyone left." Nora nodded gently. "Sometimes people don't see what you need." "But I'm here." Hazel blinked back tears she didn't want to show. "Can I stay a little?" "You can stay as long as you want," Nora replied. Silence settled between them, the comfortable kind, not the heavy one Hazel carried around all day. Then, without even realizing why, Nora started humming again, soft, slow, the same melody Hazel had listened to in hallways for weeks. Hazel's head lifted like she recognized something she couldn't explain. "That song," Hazel murmured. Nora tilted her head. "What about it?" Hazel didn't answer. Instead, she leaned the tiniest bit toward Nora, as if gravity had taken over. Nora kept humming. Hazel kept breathing. Something inside that child began to ease, even if just a little. But neither of them knew that someone else was already on their way to the cafeteria. And what he was about to see would change everything. Hazel didn't move for a long time. She just sat there against the wall, her fingers curled around the tiny silver pendant hanging from her neck. Nora stayed beside her without saying much, letting her breathe, letting her settle. The cafeteria felt different with only the two of them there. Quieter, yes, but also safe in a way Hazel hadn't felt in a long time. Nora finally spoke, her voice low and gentle. "Rough day?" Hazel nodded without looking up. "I got mad in class again." "What happened?" Nora asked. Hazel pulled her knees closer. "Everyone was talking, too loud. I couldn't think." Nora nodded slowly, giving her space to continue. "And then my pencil broke," Hazel added, her voice cracking. "I tried to ask for another one, but the words, they got stuck." Nora lowered her eyes, understanding more than she let on. "Sometimes the smallest things feel huge when your heart's already hurting." Hazel didn't reply, but something in her face shifted, like Nora had said something no one else had ever explained to her. After a moment, Nora leaned back slightly and asked, "Do you want to tell me what that necklace means to you?" Hazel touched the pendant with care, her voice barely above a breath. "It was my mom's. She wore it every day." Nora waited because she could tell that wasn't everything. Hazel continued, "She used to sing to me at night, but I can't remember all of it anymore. Just pieces." She swallowed hard. "I've been trying to remember." Nora's chest tightened. She knew what it meant to hold onto a memory with both hands, afraid it would slip through your fingers, so she didn't say anything yet. She just sat closer, the way you do when words won't fix something, but your presence might. Hazel sniffed and wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Why do you hum all the time?" The question made Nora smile softly. "I guess the music stayed with me. It helps me keep going." Hazel listened for a second, then whispered, "Can you do it again?" Nora didn't hesitate. She drew in a slow breath and let the song spill out. Simple notes, warm and steady, wrapping around the room one at a time. Hazel let her body lean against Nora's arm without thinking, like the melody was something her heart recognized. A few feet away, the cafeteria doors stood partially open. Hazel didn't notice. Nora didn't notice. But footsteps echoed faintly down the hallway. Across the school parking lot, Trevor Redding walked briskly toward the entrance. His phone was still warm in his hand from the message he'd gotten from the school counselor. Hazel had broken down during reading time. She wouldn't talk. She wouldn't move. She just cried until she couldn't breathe. Trevor had left a meeting halfway through, ignoring the irritated looks from his business partners. He didn't care. All he knew was his daughter needed him, again, and he had no idea what he was walking into. Inside the building, he moved quickly, checking classrooms, peering into offices, searching for any sign of her. A teacher pointed him toward the cafeteria. When he pushed the door open, he expected to find Hazel in another meltdown, curled up under a table or hiding behind a chair. He did not expect to see Nora Briggs sitting on the floor beside her. He did not expect the humming. He did not expect Hazel leaning against someone other than him. Trevor stood there for several seconds, unable to process the scene. He didn't step forward, didn't speak. His heart thumped heavily in his chest because something about that song, something about the way Hazel's tiny body softened as Nora hummed, it didn't make sense. Hazel's mother had sung that same melody every night, without fail, before Trevor understood the weight of that moment, before he could decide whether to interrupt. Hazel spoke in a quiet voice he hadn't heard in months. "That's the one," she whispered. "That's the song." But Trevor wasn't ready for what that meant. And the truth behind that melody was about to shake him more than anything he'd faced since the day he lost his wife. Trevor hadn't planned to stay hidden by the cafeteria door. He told himself he would walk in immediately, call Hazel's name, apologize for being late, do the whole routine he'd been repeating for 2 years. But the moment he heard that melody, everything inside him locked up. That lullaby wasn't generic. It wasn't something you'd hear on the radio or find in a music book. His wife had learned it from her grandmother, who learned it from hers. It was a private family thing, something meant for bedtime, something Hazel's mother sang only to Trevor and their daughter. No one outside their home ever heard it. Yet here it was, floating gently across the cafeteria from the voice of a woman Trevor had never spoken to. Hazel leaned closer to Nora and whispered, "Keep going, please." Trevor swallowed hard. His fingers tightened around the doorframe. He didn't want to interrupt, but he also didn't understand how any of this could be real. Nora's voice never wavered. She hummed through the next verse effortlessly, like she had sung it 1,000 times. Meanwhile, Hazel's breathing steadied, her body relaxing against Nora's arm, as though she finally felt safe. Safe in a way Trevor had failed to give her. Hazel whispered, "My mom used to sing just like that." Nora's humming tapered off, softening into silence. "She had good taste," Nora replied with a small smile. Trevor stepped forward finally, unable to hold himself back anymore. Hazel's head shot up. "Dad?" Nora looked up too, startled. She straightened her posture immediately, like a child caught somewhere she wasn't supposed to be. "Mr. Redding, I didn't hear you come in." Trevor meant to say something kind, something calm, something rational. Instead, what came out was, "How do you know that song?" Nora blinked. "I'm sorry?" "That lullaby," Trevor said, his voice sharper than intended. "Where did you hear it?" Hazel pulled her knees in again, as if preparing for another storm. "Dad, she was helping me." "I know," Trevor said quickly, trying not to lose himself. "I know she was helping. He turned toward Nora again. "Please, tell me where you learned it." Nora studied him for a long moment. Something about his intensity made her lower her gaze. "My mother used to sing it, and hers before her." Trevor stared at her like she had spoken another language. "That's not possible," he said quietly. "My wife. That song came from her family. She never shared it outside our house. She only used it for Hazel. It belongs to her side." Nora didn't flinch, but she didn't break eye contact either. "Songs travel farther than we think, Mr. Redding." Hazel looked back and forth between them, confused. "Dad, why does it matter?" Trevor opened his mouth, then closed it again. He didn't want to scare her. He didn't want to make her feel wrong for finding comfort. But everything inside him twisted at the idea that a stranger somehow carried a piece of his wife's voice. He eased himself onto one of the cafeteria benches. "Hazel, your mom used to sing that song only when things were hard. The night before she passed, she sang it to you twice. You don't remember, but you fell asleep on her lap." Hazel's eyes glistened. "I remember her holding me, not the song anymore." Trevor nodded painfully. "I didn't think anyone else on earth even knew it existed." Nora wiped her hands on her work pants. "Sometimes grief takes from us, and sometimes it returns the smallest piece when we need it most." She glanced at Hazel. Maybe today was one of those days. Hazel slid off the bench and walked toward her dad. She didn't hug him. She hadn't done that in months, but she stood close enough for him to feel her warmth. "Dad," she whispered. "She sang it the exact same way Mom did." Trevor looked at his daughter, then at Nora. He wasn't angry. He wasn't suspicious. He was overwhelmed, because this moment felt bigger than coincidence, but too gentle to be anything scary. Nora stood. "If I crossed a line, I'm sorry. I only wanted to comfort her." Trevor shook his head. "You didn't cross anything. You did something I haven't been able to do." Nora didn't respond. She simply picked up her mop and waited for them to decide what happened next. But before anyone said another word, Hazel surprised them both with something no one expected. Something that finally forced Trevor to face the truth he'd been avoiding since the day he lost his wife. Hazel stood between her father and Nora like she was trying to hold two worlds together with her tiny hands. Her breath shook a little, but she didn't back away this time. She looked at Nora first, then her father, then down at her shoes as if choosing the right words from the floor. "Dad," she whispered, "I didn't know how to tell you." Trevor leaned forward. "Tell me what?" Hazel pressed the pendant to her chest before answering. "Mom used to say, if I ever missed her too much, I should listen for the song. She said it would find me one day." Trevor's eyebrows pulled together. He had heard his wife say many poetic, comforting things, but never that. "Hazel, when did she tell you that?" Hazel took a shaky breath. "The night before the accident." Trevor felt something sharp strike behind his ribs. He remembered that night, his wife brushing Hazel's hair, tucking her into bed, kissing her forehead. But he hadn't realized there were words exchanged between mother and daughter that he never heard. Hazel continued, her voice breaking. "I kept listening. Every night, every lunch, every hallway. I kept hoping someone, somewhere, would sing it." Trevor opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Hazel turned to Nora, her eyes glassy but determined. "When you hummed it the first time, I didn't say anything because I thought maybe it was in my head, but I heard it again today." Nora swallowed, her voice quiet. "I didn't know it meant so much to you." Hazel took a small step closer to her. Can you sing the first part? Not the humming, the real part." Trevor stiffened. "Hazel, it's okay, Dad. I just want to know if I remember it right." Nora hesitated. It wasn't a hesitation rooted in fear, but in respect, like she understood the weight of what she was about to do. She sat back down on the cafeteria floor, motioning Hazel to sit too. Hazel slid beside her instantly, her shoulder brushing Nora's arm. Trevor watched, feeling torn between confusion and gratitude. Nora drew in a breath and sang quietly, not loud, not showy, just a gentle line of lyrics that floated through the room like warm air. "When the day feels heavy and your heart feels small, I'll sing your name softly till you don't feel alone at all." Hazel's lips parted, her eyes widened. She whispered the rest instinctively. "Because love doesn't leave, even when it seems gone. Close your eyes, little one, and just follow the song." Trevor felt the world tilt under him. He grabbed the edge of the cafeteria table to steady himself. Not even he remembered all the words. Only Hazel's mother knew the full version. He hadn't heard it sung aloud since she passed. Trevor's voice broke. How do you know the words too?" Nora didn't rush to answer. She ran a hand over her forehead and exhaled slowly. "Mr. Redding, I'm not sure there's a simple explanation." Trevor stared at her. "There has to be one." She shook her head softly. "There might not." Hazel touched Nora's arm again, not for comfort, but for connection. "Did your mom sing it to you too?" Nora nodded. "Every night." This time Hazel whispered, "So, are we connected somehow?" Trevor had no idea what to say. The logical part of his mind tried to reject the idea completely, but the part of him still grieving, still longing, couldn't deny how real it felt. Nora looked Hazel in the eyes. Sometimes, music moves the same way grief does. It passes through families, through people. It doesn't always follow rules. Trevor ran a hand over his face. But this song, it wasn't in any book. It wasn't recorded. It wasn't shared. Nora nodded. "Some things are meant to be carried, not taught." Hazel turned to her father, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Dad, I felt like Mom heard me today. Through her." Trevor's throat tightened so painfully he could barely breathe. He looked at Nora, really looked at her. And for the first time, he didn't see a janitor. He didn't see an employee. He saw someone who had unknowingly walked into his daughter's life at the exact moment Hazel needed someone who understood the way silence hurts. Trevor lowered himself to the floor beside them, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hazel," he said, "we're going to figure this out. Together." Hazel wiped her face. You promise? He nodded. I promise. But before they could say anything else, Nora's expression changed. Subtle, but enough. She looked at Trevor with an honesty that made him brace himself, because clearly she had something else to say. And Trevor had no idea that her next words would reveal a link between their families that he never saw coming. Nora didn't speak right away. She pressed her hands together, staring at the floor as if she was still deciding whether she had any right to say what was sitting heavy on her chest. Hazel waited with wide eyes, and Trevor leaned in slightly, bracing himself without realizing it. Finally, Nora let out a shaky breath. Mr. Redding, I didn't plan on ever saying this. I didn't think it mattered anymore. But now, after hearing your daughter finish the lyrics, maybe it does. Trevor's heartbeat picked up. What are you talking about? Nora didn't look at him. She looked at Hazel. Before I worked here, back when I lived in Dalton, Georgia, I used to help my mother take care of older folks in our neighborhood. People who couldn't drive anymore or didn't have anyone to visit them. Hazel blinked. Like, sick people? Sometimes, Nora said, but mostly lonely people. Trevor felt a prickle of unease work up his neck. Go on. Nora finally raised her eyes and met his. There was an elderly woman we visited every Thursday. Her name was Morena. She didn't have kids. She didn't have siblings, but she had these old photo albums that she kept in a little wooden box under her bed. Hazel leaned forward. Did she have a picture of my mom? Trevor gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Hazel, sweetheart, let her tell it. Nora continued. One day, Marina asked me if I wanted to hear a song she learned from her grandmother. She said it was special. Said her grandmother only sang it to her when she was scared, and then... Nora swallowed hard. She sang the exact same lullaby we just sang together. Trevor stared at her. Are you saying Hazel's mother knew this woman? I don't know, Nora admitted, but Marina told me something else. She said her grandmother learned the song from a woman she lived with when she was young. A woman who left home and disappeared from her family for years. Marina didn't know her name. She only remembered her voice. Trevor rubbed a hand through his hair. There are thousands of families in the South. Songs get passed down. I agree, Nora said gently. But it wasn't just the tune. It was the lyrics. The same verses Hazel's mother sang. That doesn't just happen by accident. Hazel clutched her pendant tightly. So, does that mean our families knew each other a long time ago? I can't say for sure, Nora said, but sometimes people cross paths without realizing it. Sometimes the things they leave behind, songs, stories, memories, travel even when they don't. Trevor looked overwhelmed. He rested his elbows on his knees and leaned forward, trying to make sense of everything. I never met anyone from her grandmother's side. She didn't talk much about her past, just bits and pieces. Nora nodded softly. Marina didn't talk much either, but she said the woman she learned the song from used to sing with her hand on her heart, the same way Hazel's mother did. Hazel began to cry silently, but this time, it wasn't the same kind of pain. It was softer, almost relieved. Dad, maybe Mom didn't leave me. Maybe the song came back to find me like she said. Trevor pulled her into his arms. For the first time in months, Hazel didn't push him away. She sank into him, letting herself be held the way she used to be, small, fragile, trusting. Nora watched them with a tight smile, her eyes shining. She stood slowly, giving them space. Trevor looked up at her. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to, Nora replied. Hazel needed someone to sit with her, that's all. No, Trevor said firmly. You gave her something I thought she lost forever. Nora didn't argue. She simply nodded and took a step back. Sometimes the right moment shows up when the world feels the most unfair. Hazel pulled away from Trevor and walked up to Nora, wrapping her arms around her waist in a small, gentle hug. Don't stop singing, Hazel whispered. Nora placed a hand on her back. I won't, not if it helps you remember. Trevor stood and exhaled deeply, the weight of the past 2 years slowly lifting off his chest. But as they walked out of that cafeteria, something unexpected happened. Something that would change not only Hazel's heart, but Trevor's path forward too. As the three of them stepped out of the cafeteria, the hallway felt different. Not brighter or louder, just easier somehow, as if the heavy air Hazel carried around had shifted into something lighter. Trevor didn't say much at first. He was still trying to hold on to the moment without falling apart. Nora walked a few steps behind, keeping a respectful distance. She wasn't trying to insert herself where she didn't belong. But Hazel slowed her pace until Nora caught up, her small hand reaching out to lightly hold onto Nora's sleeve. Trevor glanced back, surprised. Hazel hadn't willingly reached for anyone in months. "You all right, kiddo?" he asked softly. Hazel nodded. "Can we talk? All of us?" Trevor hesitated, then nodded. They stopped near one of the lunch tables stacked against the wall. Hazel climbed up onto the bench, her feet dangling, her pendant resting on her chest. She looked at Nora first. "You don't have to go," she said shyly. Nora sat beside her. "I'm not going anywhere unless you want me to." Hazel gave a small smile, a tired one, but real. Trevor sat across from them, his fingers rubbing the stress lines on his forehead. "Hazel," Trevor began, "I'm sorry for everything, for not seeing how much you were hurting, for not knowing how to help." Hazel looked up, her eyes steady. "You didn't do it on purpose." "I still should have been more present," Trevor replied. His voice didn't crack, but it threatened to. "You've been screaming without making a sound, and I kept thinking you'd bounce back on your own." Hazel's eyes softened. "I didn't know how to ask for help." Trevor nodded slowly. "I didn't know how to offer it." Nora listened quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't want to interrupt something so delicate. But Hazel surprised her again. "Can you stay in my life?" she asked. "Not just at school. Like, can we still talk after today?" Trevor looked at Nora, unsure how she would respond. Nora exhaled gently. "If your father is all right with it, and if it helps you, I'd be honored." Hazel let out a breath that sounded like relief. Trevor looked at Nora, not as a janitor, not as a stranger, but as someone who had given his daughter the one thing he couldn't: connection. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Not just for today, for seeing her." Nora didn't smile. She just touched Hazel's shoulder lightly. "Children hurt quietly. You just have to sit long enough to hear them." Hazel slid off the bench and took both their hands, one in each small palm. For the first time in a long time, Trevor saw a future where Hazel wasn't drowning, a future where they weren't alone, a future where healing wasn't something they chased, but something that finally found them. And as they walked out of the school together, Trevor realized something he should have known all along. Grief doesn't disappear, but it can soften when shared. And sometimes, help comes from the person everyone else walked past without noticing. Healing starts the moment you let someone in. And if you are listening to this, maybe it's time to open your own door too. If you enjoyed this story, share it with someone who needs a reminder that connection still matters. And remember, no matter how dark life feels, it only takes one honest moment to let the light back in.